Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and often we deal with the subject of human rights. What does that mean, and where is it going? I am really honored to have with us today Edward Bartlett. He's the president of SAVE, S-A-V-E. It's an organization focused on fairness and due process on college campuses. They do have a website, saveservices.org is the website, and there's a picture of that landing page there. You can check it out. Edward, good to see you. How are you?
I'm doing great, Perry. Yourself?
Yeah, doing well. Thank you, and thank you for your time. We value it greatly. First of all, tell us about SAVE. What is it you guys actually do?
Well, SAVE used to be focused, as you just said, focused on college campus issues, due process, fairness for male students. But times have changed. You may have heard that President Biden wanted to redefine the meaning of sex under the Title IX law. Well, we were the lead organization that said no, and we actually got that blocked just last month. So we are very happy and very proud of that accomplishment.
Well, good for you. Thank you for your work. And again, to our viewers and listeners, saveservices.org is the website. Well, Edward, recently, as you well know, the president pulled the United States out of the UN Human Rights Council in the UN. This is a big deal. What's your take on it?
Yeah, well, it really is a big deal. So we're talking about one of the agencies of the United Nations. I'm just going to say, without detail, the United Nations has gone corrupt in so many different ways. We could talk about that for a full hour, I'm sure. But let's zero in on the Human Rights Council, which is based in Geneva, Switzerland. You may recall, do you remember Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations?
Yes.
He was a bright guy, and I'm going to read you a quote that he said about what was then called the Commission, the UN Commission on Human Rights. Quote, this commission, quote, cast a shadow on the reputation of the United Nations system as a whole. So for that reason, they got rid of the Commission on Human Rights and replaced it with the Human Rights Council. 20 years later, I have to say the situation is just as corrupt, just as precarious as it was back when Kofi Annan was speaking his truth.
So when the United States withdrew, what kind of a shockwave did that send?
So recall that President Trump previously withdrew from the Human Rights Council back in 2018. And yes, that's a big deal, partly because the U.S. contributes a lot of money, partly because sort of people around the world think of the U.S. as a upholder of the concept of human rights. So it was both a financial and a symbolic blow, 2018. Then Joe Biden was elected. He reestablished our membership in the Human Rights Council in 2021. So people were not totally surprised, partly because we've seen other parts of the UN, like the UNRWA, which deals with the Palestinian refugees. It became very clear that UNRWA was extremely corrupt, was actually financing part of the attack on Israel on October 7th. So anyway, so I diverge, but the Human Rights Council truly has become a blight on the whole concept of human rights for all.
Is there a bias in that council against the United States?
Very definitely. They've actually looked at the number of resolutions or condemnations, and they found that the United States received far more recommendations, 1,025, about human rights issues, which is far more than any other country. It suggests the U.S. is a scofflaw as far as human rights, which of course is nonsense. So yeah, they focused on the U.S., they focus a lot on Israel, and they've also been very demeaning to men. What is the common denominator? The common denominator is that the UN as a whole, and Human Rights Council in particular, has become enamored with neo-Marxist ideology, right? Neo-Marxism is all about, the oppressed and the oppressors. Mm-hmm. Well, who are the oppressors in the current, system of the world according to the Marxists? Well, it's the United States, it's Israel, and yes, also men. Men are singled out as the patriarchal oppressors. So this is all springs from this corrupt ideology that's taken over the United Nations.
Wow, I didn't know the men part. So if they're oppressors, are they suggesting abusers?
So this is where it really gets interesting, because there have been hundreds, literally hundreds of studies on domestic violence all around the world, US, Canada, Europe, and so forth. And every study says this is an equal opportunity problem. Women are just as likely to engage in physical domestic violence as men. All right. But again, that contradicts the Marxist narrative that says, oh, well, men are patriarchal oppressors because they are the ones who do all the domestic violence. Well, that is utterly false. So, yeah, there's so much that this ideology has taken over the thinking.
I guess where my brain goes on tilt with this, isn't most people of the council men?
Well, you're making a very good point, but it shows the power of ideology. Okay, when ideology is such a powerful force, it overcomes reason. You may be aware that the UN has what's called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's considered a founding document of the entire UN. That Universal Declaration says, "Thou shalt not discriminate on the basis of sex." Well, guess what? They don't really pay attention to that particular provision in the Universal Declaration anymore. It's just another example.
I'm kind of curious, Edward, is there a parallel what you see happening in the UN, in particular with the Human Rights Council, and what you work with on college campuses?
I have to say, absolutely yes. I have to say that, in my opinion, neo-Marxist ideology has become more widespread than most people realize. It's very common in college campuses, especially in departments of sociology, English departments. Students, talk about. Think about all the protests against the Palestinians. Protests in favor of the Palestinians against the Israelis on college campuses. Again, there's that Marxist ideology again. So, yeah, It really is stunning to acknowledge the extent of Marxism around the world.
Before I leave the UN, I'm just curious. You said it's a corrupt organization. I don't think anybody argues with that. But how did it go from its original charter to dealing with human rights?
Yeah, I've asked myself that same question, and I don't think there is any one incident that was the turning point. I think it was a gradual evolution. For example, the current Secretary General of the UN, his name is Antonio Guterres.
Mm-hmm.
He is from Portugal. Guess what? In Portugal, he was the Secretary General of the Socialist Party of Portugal for 10 years. And then after that, he became the head of the International Socialist Movement. This is the man who is now running or speaking for the United Nations. So it's just been, incremental steps, little by little, and now we have a disaster.
How important / influential is the position of an ambassador to the UN?
Wow. Well, let's talk about the U.S. ambassador, and I'll just mention that we actually met with not the ambassador, but with staffers in the UN mission just last week. So we were in New York City, and we do have, I think it's fair to say, we have an inside understanding. So it just depends on the ambassador. For example, just in the last 2 weeks, the UN mission of the United States has very aggressively spoken out in opposition to DEI. has spoken out very aggressively in opposition to gender ideology. That's just in the last 2 weeks. So it's no coincidence, of course, this is a result of the presidential election. So it sort of depends on the individual, the willingness to sort of buck the tide, buck the wave of sort of, what is acceptable to say within the sacred halls of the United Nations.
Do you have any feeling what it's going to be like this time when President Trump addresses the UN?
Wow. Buckle your seatbelt, sit down, get ready for some fireworks. We've already seen some amazing stuff, again, in the last 2 weeks, proposed resolutions from the U.S., specifically to UNICEF. UNICEF is another one of the UN agencies, specifically, opposing DEI and opposing the gender ideology language in certain resolutions. So, yeah, this will be a ride. Yeah, get ready.
So I guess I'm not a pro on this, but I've been trying to keep track of it, and it appears to me that the UN, there's the old saying, get the UN out of the U.S. and the U.S. out of the UN. But the point is this, it is in our country. They come in here, they're given special treatment, and it appears, from what I understand, that the U.S. is getting more scrutiny than other authoritarian regimes. Why? I mean, that's like biting the hand that feeds you.
Well, it's the same answer as why is Israel getting all of this criticism from the United Nations? Is because Israel is viewed as an occupier or an occupying country, and that's how they use that word, occupying, over and over again. So I didn't make up that word. That's what the UN says. Occupying, implying that they are an oppressor force. Again, the United States is the world's upholder of capitalism. Well, capitalism and socialism are polar opposites. So, yeah, no surprise that they don't like the idea of the United States being the banner holder of capitalism, world capitalism.
So, does the UN consider, in spite of 1948 ruling of it becoming a state, that the UN still sees it as a non-state occupier?
You pointed out perfectly. It was the UN state, 1947, I believe, that authorized and validated the state of Israel. That was done by the United Nations. So how is it possible that the UN is turning its back on its own treaty? I don't know. But again, ideology is a very powerful force in human affairs.
Okay, one more question before I take a break, and then we'll go over to colleges, and that is, do you think, given the tenure and the attitude and the atmosphere of this administration, that the UN is long for the United States?
You're asking whether the UN will be expelled from the United States?
Or, yeah, maybe expelled, or we get out or something. I mean, there's something dramatic change at the UN.
Well, here's my prediction. You remember the League of Nations during the Second World War? It basically fell apart because it became irrelevant. That's what I see happening now with the United Nations. That in 2025, it's becoming irrelevant to the real issues that affect the world. So my prediction is that the United Nations will move its way into irrelevance. And people will say that, and I'm not the only one saying that, by the way, and people will say, hey, we've got to come up with a better approach.
So basically you're saying it'll implode?
It'll implode. The Turkish president, his name is Erdogan, quote, UN has become a, quote, dysfunctional, unwieldy, and inert structure. How's that for a criticism?
What's so amazing to me is that all these foreign ambassadors come from all over the world. They go to New York. They get a taste of capitalism and Western lifestyle. They eat at the fancy restaurants in New York. They get They get chauffeured around. They park everywhere nobody else can park. And yet they want to be against it and go home and have social rule. Kind of a mixed brain thing, don't you think?
Yeah, well, again, socialism is not logical. It's all about concentrating power in the hands of the government and in the hands of the few.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, let me take a quick break. Folks, check out Edward's website, saveservices.org. There's a picture of the landing page there, saveservices.org. We'll be right back. Welcome back. An honor to have with us today Edward Bartlett. He's the president of SAVE, S-A-V-E. It's an organization focused on fairness and due process on college campuses. He also now is being stretched into all areas of life. He does have a great website, very resourceful, saveservices.org. And there's a picture of the landing page of his website there. Edward, I want to come over to the college campuses and ask you a couple of questions there. In light of affirmative action supposedly being wiped out, I don't know, and all of the rise of anti-Semitism lately, how would you rate college campuses today?
Whoa. Well, I guess I would say there's a great deal of variability. I would say that your Ivy League colleges tend to be very socialist, and they are the ones that are sort of the rear guard for the current movement to get rid of DEI and so forth. But if you go to smaller colleges, I think that you'll find, less polarization, less Marxist ideology. I guess the point I want to make is if you are a parent and your child is planning to go to college soon, check it out. Find out what are they talking about? What is the president saying about affirmative action, DEI? What is the percentage of male students on campus? Because that's an example how neo-Marxist ideology has pushed male students out of the picture.
I never thought of that. So are you saying that the student body is made up of more females than males?
I believe it's 2% female. We're talking about undergraduate enrollments, 42% male, the remainder male. And there's a number of reasons for this, and I'll explain to you one of them. Despite this Title IX law that I mentioned earlier that supposedly is supposed to prohibit sex discrimination, several years ago, we started looking at the college scholarships. We were appalled and surprised to see how many colleges, literally numbering in the thousands of colleges, offer female-only scholarships and essentially no male-only scholarships. We actually filed complaints with the federal office, Department of Education. We've won almost every one of our complaints, right? We just got a response back a few days ago. University of Hawaii had a whole series of female-only scholarships, none for men. So that's just one reason why men have been made to feel unwelcome on college campuses.
Is the elimination of affirmative action being followed through?
Well, affirmative action, of course, goes all the way back to the LBJ days, the Great Society. And then affirmative action was not viewed as affirmative enough. So they said, okay, we have to call it DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Of course, some people say that really means DIE, die. So you don't hear the phrase affirmative action really anymore. It's all DIE because that's much more overt. It's much more aggressive and much more obviously unconstitutional.
But federal dollars going to education tied to DEI and affirmative action is going to be fairly significant, don't you think?
Well, it is, and unfortunately, we did a press release in December. We tracked the DEI grants from the Department of Education to colleges. It's outrageous that the Department of Education, that's supposed to be upholding, gender, neutrality is pushing these DEI programs. But again, don't. Ideology is not about rationality. It's all about power and control.
So, as you well know, the DOE, the Department of Education, is certainly under the microscope. There's a lot being said and a lot being uncovered. What do you think about what's going on, and does it survive?
So you probably heard that President Trump has nominated a new Secretary of Education. She previously was the head of the Small Business Administration. And it's no secret that Trump has talked about phasing out the Department of Education. That's a tall order. I think we're talking about $8 billion. It's a lot of money. So the idea is some of the functions, like the student loan program, would be farmed out to the Treasury Department, whereas other programs that are directly designed to support the educational process would be farmed out to the state level. So, but this process has really just begun. We really don't know where this is going to go over time.
His point, I think, is well made, that of the 40, we're number 40, and of student costs per student, we're the highest. So we pay the highest for the lowest score. I mean, that's a legitimate argument, don't you think?
I think it's not only legitimate, I think it's a devastating argument that, it's so contradictory on the face. How is it possible that pouring more money into schools would result in less educational achievement? Well, it's because we have, for example, what are called gay-straight alliances funded by the Centers for Disease Control. There's called social emotional learning, which has become a new piece of the curriculum. There's so many different ways that people have pushed this neo-Marxist agenda, under the guise of many other different names, but it's taken away the focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Let me ask you one other question as it relates to colleges, Edward, and that would be, here comes DEI. It's been around for a long time, but now we're really identifying it. But this could be a game changer in education if somebody isn't monitoring it. And what I mean by that, if the professor isn't double checking a student's work, and it's just nothing more than a repeat of an AI button, what is the quality of the person being educated?
Yeah, that's the question I've asked myself countless times. And so much of this comes back to the teacher and the professor. Do they see their role as education, or do they see their role as indoctrination? I've seen so many pictures of classrooms, like sixth grade classrooms, festooned with Black Lives Matter posters and festooned with the gay pride flag. I mean, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah. Okay, so I guess overall, we're in a change. I'm not sure how this is going to impact human rights as a whole, but it looks like it's on the table for serious consideration, right?
Well, very much so. And I think the advice and encouragement I would give to your listeners and viewers is speak out. Speak out. There's so many ways to speak out. I'll give an example. I was at the local mailbox where I live here, and there were two females. One was the female mail worker, postal worker, and somebody said the word mailman. and the other woman said, "Oh, we're not supposed to use that word anymore." So I said, "Oh, well, I've heard lots of people talk about Mother Earth, and necessity is the mother of invention. Nobody's complained about those words. So do we really need to complain about using the word postman?" And they both chuckled, and they both agreed with me. I'm saying that little anecdote to make the point. We need to speak out, whether it's with our neighbors, go to the local school board meetings, check out the library at your child's school. Speak out, be present, be heard, and be listened to. That's, I think, where all of this comes from.
All right, good stuff. Edward, thank you for your time. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, you can check out SAVE. It's called SaveServices.org is the website. You can learn more about him and his organization and what they do, SaveServices.org. They're out there looking for fairness and due process there on college campuses and other areas of our life. Thank you, Edward. Good to see you. Thanks for your time.
Hey, great to see you.